Everyone knows Eric Cartman's businesses always fail. The universe always finds a way to tear them down. But across nearly 30 years of South Park, he launched more than 10 ventures. Some of them actually worked, and the strangest one sold 1 million albums before he destroyed it in 15 seconds with 2 words. In this video, we break down every business that Eric Cartman has ruined. Finger Bang, the dream that started everything. The summer of 2000 was one of the strangest moments in American pop music's recent history, and anyone who lived through it probably has some version of the same memory. Radio stations were not playing one kind of music or 2 or 3. They were playing a format that had become so dominant and so uniform that the difference between one act and another had collapsed almost entirely into a question of hair color and choreography. Boy bands had taken the previous 3 years and turned them into a showcase for everything that could be achieved by combining 5 reasonably attractive young men, a team of professional songwriters, a synchronized dance routine, and the willingness of teenage girls to treat minor variations in performance style as meaningful differences between distinct artistic identities. The Backstreet Boys had released their first major album in 1996. NSYNC followed. 98 Degrees followed. By the time the calendar hit 2000, the format had become so successful that it had begun producing its own internal logic, a set of invisible rules about what a boy band needed to have and do and look like in order to earn the kind of attention that translated directly into money. Every major label was looking for the next version of the same thing. Every producer working in that space understood the formula. And somewhere in the middle of all that, Trey Parker looked at what was happening and decided the most accurate mirror he could hold up to it was a 10-year-old boy who had a dream from God that told him he was going to be rich. The episode aired on July 12, 2000 during South Park's 4th season and carries a title that the show delivers with complete deadpan sincerity: something you can do with your finger. The title functions the same way most of the show's double entendres functioned at that point in its run, landing one joke for anyone paying attention to the obvious reading and a different joke for anyone thinking about what a 9-year-old would genuinely name a boy band after deciding that a finger had something to do with making a gun shape with your hand. Both readings are intentional. Neither is the point. The point is the dream, and what Cartman does with it once he has it, and what that says about the entire commercial machinery that boy bands had built for themselves at exactly the moment the episode aired. The dream itself opens the episode with a version of Cartman surrounded by screaming fans, elevated above the crowd, performing with the boys in a stadium-scale fantasy version of what becoming a pop star looked like to a 4th grader who had spent several years watching the industry produce version after version of the same act to overwhelming commercial success. In the dream, the money involved is enormous, presented in the specific round figure of $10 million, which Parker chose not because it was the most realistic estimate of what a boy band might earn, but because it is the number a child imagines when trying to think of a quantity large enough to mean that nothing would ever be a problem again. $10 million is not a salary or a profit projection. It is a wish shaped like a number, and Cartman, upon waking, decides the dream is not simply a dream. He decides it is a message from God, which is the kind of interpretation that requires both complete sincerity and complete disregard for any available evidence, and which describes Cartman's relationship to reality throughout the show's entire run more precisely than almost any other single moment. Convincing the boys to be in the band requires Cartman to deploy the first and most fundamental tool in his business arsenal, which is the confident presentation of an idea as though its success has already been established, and the only remaining question is whether the other person is smart enough to get in now. Stan and Kyle are skeptical for the same reason most reasonable people would be skeptical of a 4th grader's plan to form a boy band and earn $10 million in the near term. It is not a realistic plan. But skepticism in South Park rarely survives Cartman's combination of absolute certainty and social pressure, and the boys are soon enrolled in the project whether they wanted to be or not. Kenny, characteristically, expresses no position of his own. What happens next is where the episode's satire moves from broad and obvious into something considerably more precise. Cartman's theory of the business is not actually wrong in the way that naive business theories are usually wrong. He has done something resembling research. He has watched the industry carefully enough to understand that the emotional mechanics of boy band fandom have nothing to do with musical talent and everything to do with a specific relationship between performer and audience that the format had figured out how to manufacture reliably. The screaming girls in the stadium of his dream are not responding to virtuosity. They are responding to availability, to the carefully constructed sense that the performers on stage might, under the right circumstances, be accessible to them in a way that more conventional celebrities were not. Cartman understands understands this on some level, which is why his plan does not include any stage in which the boys become better musicians. The plan skips directly from having the idea to being famous, because from a strictly commercial standpoint, the space between those two things in the late 1990s boy band era was genuinely smaller than it had ever been before. The fifth member question is the first moment where the business plan encounters a complication it cannot simply ignore. Boy bands required 5 members. This was not a formal rule written down anywhere, but it was a structural feature of the format so consistent across so many successful acts that violating it would have felt wrong in the same way that a basketball team with 4 players would feel wrong. Cartman accepts the requirement without questioning it, which is itself a revealing detail. The boy who will challenge any authority he finds inconvenient accepts without comment the invisible genre conventions of a commercial music format. The auditions held at Cartman's house are a kind of miniature comedy that contains everything the episode is trying to say about the gap between what the format demands and what the people trying to participate in it can actually provide. Ike auditions, Butters auditions, neither succeeds. The 5th slot sits empty until Wendy Testaberger arrives with something that Cartman cannot dispute even though he wants to. A genuinely strong performance, the kind that makes the other auditions look like what they are. Wendy being a girl presents Cartman with a problem that the episode handles with the same precision it brings to everything else. A boy band cannot have a girl in it. That is the rule. But the band needs 5 members, and Wendy is demonstrably the best option available, which creates the specific kind of logical trap that Cartman rarely finds himself in, where the thing he wants and the principle he wants to maintain are pointing in different directions. His solution is the kind of compromise that preserves the form while gutting the substance entirely. Wendy is in the band, but dressed as a boy, under the theory that nobody will notice because she does not have the physical features that would make the deception impossible. The show does not comment on this reasoning beyond presenting it, which is funnier than any comment could be. The production of the Finger Bang music video represents the episode's most compressed satirical moment. Boy bands in 2000 were inseparable from their visual presentation, and the visual presentation was inseparable from a specific vocabulary of locations and lighting and emotional sincerity that the format had made its own. Cartman brings to this requirement the same approach he brings to everything else, which is to replicate the surface features of the thing he is imitating without any real understanding of why those features exist. The video gets made. It looks like a boy band video in the same way that a building with columns on the front looks like a Greek temple, which is to say it shares the most visible elements of the form without sharing anything below them. Chef, who functions throughout the episode as the voice of whatever practical wisdom is available to a group of children who have decided to pursue an enterprise they do not understand, delivers a piece of advice that the show presents as both genuinely useful and deeply absurd. Getting girls to scream for a boy band, he explains, is not about the music or the dancing or the costumes. It is about making girls believe, at least for the duration of a performance, that what they are watching is the person they would choose if choosing were possible. The advice is functionally correct as a description of how the format actually worked. Cartman receives it and immediately implements it by claiming the band is Matt Lauer, which produces the desired result because the episode is not interested in exploring the limits of the theory, only in confirming that the theory works. The mall gig is the business plan's actual test, and it arrives carrying every disadvantage that bad planning could have arranged in advance. Kenny dies before the performance, which in season 4 of South Park is presented as an inconvenience rather than a tragedy, because Kenny dying is the show's oldest running joke, and everyone on screen and in the audience understands that it is not a serious disruption to any plan. What is a serious disruption is the absence of Stan, who has been pulled away by his father Randy under circumstances that are themselves a joke about a different subject entirely. Randy's own complicated history with the kind of ambition that boy bands represented. Stan not being there when the performance is about to begin is the crisis the episode has been building toward, and the solution Cartman finds for it tells the audience everything it needs to know about what Finger Bang was ever actually going to be. Randy Marsh fills in for Stan. This decision is presented as reasonable under the circumstances, which are that someone needs to stand in the 5th position and perform, and Randy is present and willing. What the decision actually represents is the complete collapse of the premise that had held the business plan together from the beginning. Finger Bang was built around the idea that the boys, specifically, could capture the same commercial energy that had made other boy bands enormously successful. The theory was not sophisticated, but it had at least the internal consistency of targeting an audience of roughly the right age to relate to performers who were themselves children. Randy Marsh performing in the 5th position of a boy band originally designed to appeal to 4th graders is the physical embodiment of every gap between what Cartman planned planned and what the plan could actually produce. Cartman stalling for time in the mall before the performance happens involves a confrontation with mall security that results in being pepper sprayed, which is presented without commentary as simply what happens when a fourth grader tries to occupy space he has not been given permission to occupy. The pepper spray is not played for pathos. It is played for the same tone the episode maintains throughout, which is the tone of someone describing a business attempting to operate in a world slightly too complicated for its own internal logic to navigate successfully. The actual performance of Fingerbang at the South Park Mall is neither a triumph nor a disaster in the conventional sense. It happens. The audience watches. Randy and Wendy and the remaining boys stand in the configuration the format requires and deliver the product Cartman's dream had promised the world would pay $10 million to receive. The show does not dwell on the audience's reaction in any sustained way, because the audience's reaction is less interesting than the fact that the performance happens at all, with all its gaps and substitutions and compromises intact. After the performance, the boys agree to abandon the whole enterprise and go back to being regular kids. The decision is presented as mutual and relatively uncomplicated, which is one of the episode's quieter satirical points. A business that a child built on the basis of a dream he interpreted as divine instruction ends not with a dramatic collapse or a public failure or any of the conventional endings a business narrative might reach for, but with a group of fourth graders deciding they would rather do something else. The decision to stop is as casual as the decision to start was confident. The $10 million that Cartman's dream had promised never comes up as a loss. It was never real enough to be mourned. Fingerbang never gets mentioned in any episode that follows it as a significant event in Cartman's history of economic ambitions, which is itself a piece of information about how the show understood what Cartman was doing. The boy band plan was not a meaningful chapter in a developing story of failed entrepreneurship. It was one attempt, made with the same complete conviction that every Cartman plan is made with, that ran into the physical limits of what a fourth grader could execute in the real world, rather than the dream world where the execution had already been completed. Randy filling in for Stan is the episode's clearest image of that gap. The dream had specific requirements. The reality provided whatever was available. And what was available was a man in his late 30s who had once, apparently, been in a boy band himself, standing in the 5th position, performing a song about fingers to a small crowd at a Colorado shopping mall, while a 9-year-old with a dream of $10 million stood beside him and delivered the product. The business plan was not complicated. The boy band format was not complicated. The gap between what Cartman imagined and what could actually be built was, in 2000, precisely as wide as the gap between a fourth grader's conviction that God had sent him a message about money and the actual conditions available to a fourth grader trying to act on that conviction. Fingerbang is not ruined in any single dramatic moment. It simply runs out of everything a business needs to keep moving, including members who are still alive, fathers who allow their sons to attend the gig, and any real distance between the plan that was supposed to make $10 million and the reality of a man named Randy Marsh standing in a mall in Colorado filling in. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Fingerbang collapsed before it ever really began, undone by a schedule, an elevator, and the specific version of reality that a fourth grader's business plan could not account for. The next venture Cartman launched had considerably more money behind it, a genuine product to sell, and $1 million property ready to generate serious profit, and he found a way to lose all of it anyway. Section 2. The Pirate Club. The business that started a war. In the spring of 2009, Somali pirates were all over the news. Armed groups off the coast of Somalia were boarding cargo ships in the Indian Ocean and holding crews hostage for ransom. Shipping companies were rerouting vessels to avoid the area. Insurance costs for ships passing through were climbing. Governments were debating what to do about it. The biggest story came in April, when pirates boarded an American cargo ship called the Maersk Alabama and took the captain hostage. Navy snipers on a destroyer called the USS Bainbridge killed 3 pirates in a nighttime operation and freed the captain. It ran at the top of every news program for days. Cartman watched all of this and understood it completely differently from everyone else. Where most people saw a crisis, he saw an opening. Pirates were back. That was his takeaway. Real pirates, with ships and open water and no rules and no school and no parents telling them what to do. He had grown up watching the same pirate movies everyone else watched. The ones with long coats and treasure maps and captains who answered to nobody. As far as he was concerned, the news was announcing that life was now available. Off the coast of Africa. All anyone had to do was get there. The episode is called Fatbeard. It aired April 22nd, 2nd, 2009, as the 7th episode of South Park's 13th season and the mid-season finale. Parker and Stone built it and aired it 10 days after the real Navy rescue of the Maersk, Alabama captain, which is the speed at which they worked when something in the news caught their attention hard enough to build an episode around. The gap between the romantic idea of piracy and the reality of what was actually happening off the Somali coast was enormous and obvious, and exactly the kind of gap the show had always been built to examine. Cartman's lunch table pitch is built around the idea that their current lives are a waste. School, parents, rules, the same routine every day with nothing to look forward to, and no decision that actually belongs to them. He tells the boys that pirates have returned, and that Somalia is a warm tropical paradise where the water is clear blue and the adventure is constant and nobody tells anyone what to do. His description of Somalia at this moment is assembled entirely from pirate mythology, with no reference to any actual information about what the country looked like in 2009, which was a failed state with inadequate infrastructure, active internal conflict, and living conditions that bore no resemblance to anything he described. Kyle's reaction is immediate enthusiasm, but not for the reasons Cartman expected. Kyle has no interest in becoming a pirate. What Kyle wants is for Cartman to leave South Park for any reason that results in him not coming back quickly. He supports the plan without reservation. He encourages the other boys to let Cartman go. He offers to help pay for the plane ticket just to accelerate the departure, which is an investment in Cartman's absence rather than in his success. Recruitment for the pirate club goes worse than expected. Cartman makes a formal announcement at school and waits. 5 people show up: Kevin Stoley, Ike Broflovsky, Butters Stotch, Clyde Donovan, and briefly a kid named Gordon Stoltzky, who Cartman immediately removes from consideration for being a ginger. The remaining crew is 4 boys, one of whom is Kyle's much younger brother, none of whom have any sailing experience or any real understanding of what they have agreed to. Butters is there because Butters ends up in most things through a combination of misplaced trust and a genuine inability to identify situations that will be bad for him before he is already in them. The journey involves a long international flight and a 49-hour bus ride. The show does not explain the logistics of how a group of elementary school children travel internationally without adult supervision, because the logistics are beside the point. They arrive in Mogadishu dressed in full pirate costume, eye patches included, and the gap between what Cartman described and what they find is immediate and total. Somalia is not a warm tropical paradise. The infrastructure is inadequate. The streets around the port area where they arrive look nothing like anything from any pirate film any of them has ever watched. The first local they ask for directions warns them explicitly to stay away from the pirates. The warning is sincere and comes from someone who has clearly seen what happens to people who do not take it. Cartman ignores it and leads the crew toward the pirate operation. The pirates themselves are running their business out of a shanty town. Their facilities are minimal. Their pub, which is the closest thing to a social headquarters they have, serves only stale water because the supply situation does not currently allow for anything else. They are a disorganized group of men who turned to maritime crime because the legitimate economy around them had collapsed thoroughly enough that the alternatives were worse. There is no romance in what they are doing. There is no code. There is no treasure map or skull and crossbones flag or any of the other elements that Cartman's mental picture of the situation included. There is poverty and desperation and a collection of boats that have seen better years. Cartman processes none of this as a reason to leave. He processes it as a management problem. His assessment is that the pirates have capacity they are not using. They have boats, territory, and the basic structural elements of an operation that could be considerably more effective with better direction and higher morale. What they are missing is someone who understands the full scope of what they could be doing and is willing to lead them toward it. Cartman appoints himself Captain Cartman and begins addressing the deficit immediately. He leads a motivational sequence that the episode stages as a classic movie training montage, the kind where a ragged group of underdogs is transformed into something formidable through the influence of the right person at the right moment. The pirates learn new approaches, their morale improves, their operational effectiveness increases in ways that become visible quickly. The transformation is real. This is an important detail that the episode does not play as a joke. Cartman took a disorganized, demoralized group of people with underutilized resources and reorganized them around a clearer purpose with better execution. The results followed directly from the improvement in organization and direction. Under Captain Cartman, the crew starts raiding ships successfully. Their reputation builds. They become genuinely feared across a stretch of the North African Sea that had previously treated them as a minor inconvenience. The pirate operation that was producing minimal results before Cartman arrived is now producing significant ones. The French cruise ship is the high point. gunpoint. Captain Cartman's crew boards it, takes hostages, and demands ransom. The French crew offers no serious resistance, which the show treats as consistent with its standard characterization of French people in confrontational situations. The ransom negotiation proceeds. The money is secured. The hostages are released. The operation has just completed a successful engagement against an international vessel, which is the kind of outcome that sounds impossible when described as a plan for elementary school children, and entirely logical when described as the result of a well-organized pirate crew with improving operational capability. The United Nations notices. This is the moment the Enterprise crosses a threshold that no amount of organizational improvement or motivational leadership can walk back. When an operation becomes visible at the international level, in the specific way that taking a cruise ship hostage makes it visible, the tools available for responding to it change completely. The normal mechanisms for handling commercial disputes or local law enforcement situations are not relevant at this scale. What is relevant is which governments have naval assets in the area and what their rules of engagement permit when piracy has reached the level of taking civilian hostages from a vessel registered in a NATO member country. The answer arrives in the form of a Navy ship positioning itself offshore. The commander's instructions to the snipers are specific. Eliminate the pirate threat and do not hit the white ones. The snipers carry out the instructions with the speed and precision that the episode uses to make its darkest joke. The Somali pirates are killed in seconds. Every single member of the crew that Cartman organized, motivated, and led to genuine operational effectiveness is gone before the scene has time to develop further. Cartman's crew survives because of that single instruction. The commander identified them as distinct from the targets and told the snipers not to shoot them. They returned to South Park the same way they arrived, as children on a very long trip, without treasure or titles or any of the things the pitch at the lunch table had described. Right before the shooting starts, Cartman announces that he and his crew are going to be pirating forever. The word forever is still in the air when the Navy opens fire. The episode does not give him a moment to process the gap between the announcement and what immediately follows it. There is the declaration, and then there is the gunfire, and then the episode ends. The Pirate Club as a commercial enterprise ended in the same moment it reached its highest level of effectiveness. That timing is the specific cruelty the episode builds toward across its entire runtime. The organization was improving. The results were real. The ransom from the French cruise ship represented the kind of successful operation that most businesses would treat as proof of concept, evidence that the model worked and could be scaled. Instead, it was the evidence that triggered a military response calibrated to eliminate the operation completely. What Cartman built in Somalia had genuine commercial logic behind it. Ransoming ships and their crews is a business in the same structural sense that any business is a business. It involves identifying a service that people will pay to avoid, positioning oneself to provide or withhold that service, and collecting payment. The ethical dimensions of that service are a separate question from the structural one. The business logic was sound. The external response to that logic was a Navy ship and a set of snipers with clear instructions. The real USS Bainbridge, the ship involved in the actual Maersk, Alabama rescue, contacted South Park's production team after the episode aired. The crew wanted to commend Parker and Stone on it and requested copies because the streaming version was difficult to watch on a naval vessel at sea. The South Park team sent them a care package with multiple copies of the episode. The Navy crew of the ship that was referenced in the episode's real-world context found the fictional version of the same story worth celebrating and requesting additional copies of. This detail sits alongside the episode's ending in a way that does not resolve cleanly. The episode ends with everyone the pirates Cartman organized being shot dead. The people who did the real-world version of that shooting wanted copies of the episode to share with their crew. Cartman came back to South Park with nothing except a memory of a period when he was genuinely effective at something. He had identified an opportunity, recruited people, traveled to a difficult location, assessed the situation accurately, adapted his expectations to match reality rather than his prior image of what reality would look like, transformed a failing operation into a functional one, and achieved measurable results. By the standards that most business evaluations apply to leadership performance, the Somalia operation was a success right up until the military ended it. The business did not fail because Cartman made a bad decision. It did not fail because he said the wrong thing at the wrong moment, or alienated his customer base, or got outmaneuvered by a larger competitor, or failed to read the contract carefully enough. It failed because the industry he entered attracts military responses at a certain scale of success, and he reached that scale. The ceiling was not a market condition or a strategic error. It was a Navy destroyer with snipers and rules of engagement that did not include a category for fourth graders who had organized organize an effective pirate crew through good management practices. He went back to school. The Pirate Club went into the show's history as the venture that came closest to genuine operational success before it was ended by the most decisive possible external intervention. The Somali pirates who died in the operation were depicted throughout the episode with more sympathy than the show typically extends to the targets of its satire, which is itself a statement about who the episode considered responsible for the situation. Cartman went home. They did not. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Pirate Club ended the moment it attracted the kind of attention that only military assets can address. The next business Cartman built stayed much closer to home, offered a service that parents genuinely feared, and worked exactly as advertised until the market it was built on ran out of customers. Section 3. The Parental Revenge Center, the business that actually worked. Parents lie to their kids all the time. Most of them would not describe it as lying. They use words like protecting or guiding or teaching a lesson, but the basic mechanics are the same. A child gets told something that is not true by an adult who decided the truth was not useful right now. The famous fried egg commercial, the one that compared a brain to an egg frying in a pan, with the line describing this as any brain on drugs, aired throughout the 1980s and became one of the most recognized pieces of public health messaging in American television history, despite being widely criticized for being scientifically inaccurate. The campaigns kept running because the people running them believed that scaring kids worked better than explaining things to them. South Park had been making jokes about this approach for years before the 6th season episode, My Future Self and Me, aired on December 4th, 2002. This episode does not just poke at the anti-drug messaging. It builds an entire fake company around the idea that parents are willing to pay professional strangers to deceive their children if the deception produces the behavior they want. The company is called Motivation Corp, and it charges parents to hire actors who show up at the family home, presenting themselves as the child's future self after a life of drug use. The actor is disheveled, unemployed, and miserable. They tell the child, this is what happens. This is where the drugs lead. The parents stand nearby, nodding with concern. The business model of Motivation Corp is a satire of the entire anti-drug industry. The idea that emotional manipulation through false scenarios is an acceptable substitute for honest conversation. The company is not trying to help children understand drugs. It is trying to produce a behavioral outcome through whatever means are most effective, and it has decided that fabricating a living nightmare version of the child and delivering it to their front door is the most effective means available. This is presented in the episode not as a fringe service, but as a thriving business with multiple employees and a proper sales process, which is itself part of the joke. Stan discovers the scam because the actor playing his future self makes an elementary mistake. The key card in his pocket has an expiration date that matches the current year. A genuine time traveler would not be carrying a card that expires now. Stan follows the address on the back of the card to Motivation Corp's offices and watches through a window as a sales representative explains the service to another family. The rep tells the parents that it is completely acceptable to deceive children if the deception produces the behavior they want. The parents nod and sign the paperwork. Stan is disgusted but not surprised. Butters is in the same situation. His parents used Motivation Corp too, and Butters accepted the whole thing completely. When he and Stan compare notes, both of them arrive at the same conclusion. They want their parents to admit what they did and apologize for it. They look through the phone book for options. The phone book contains an advertisement for the Parental Revenge Center of Western America. It promises guaranteed results. They call the number, follow the address to a grungy alley, push open a door, and find Cartman sitting behind a large desk. The office looks exactly how Cartman believes an office should look. There is a telephone on the desk. There is a water cooler in the corner because Cartman has decided that water coolers are the universal signal of a legitimate professional operation. The desk itself is large and serious looking. The room has been set up to communicate to anyone who enters it that they have come to the right place and are dealing with someone who knows what they are doing. This is a technique Cartman has used before and will use again throughout his business career. Build the appearance of professionalism first and let that appearance do the persuasive work before any other part of the pitch begins. His service offering is specific and detailed. The Parental Revenge Center will, for a fee, send a crew to the client's home and apply feces to the interior surfaces. Cartman has prepared color swatches for this consultation. He goes through them with the calm efficiency of a contractor walking a client through finish options. Nut and Corn Crunch, Classic Brown, Baby Green, Pepto Black, Basic Tan, Black and Tan Swirl, Cookies and Cream, Hangover. Each color is named, described, and available. The client can choose. This level level of preparation is the detail that makes the scene work, because it demonstrates that Cartman did not invent the color names on the spot. He thought about them ahead of time. He made swatches. He built a proper product catalog for a service that involves covering people's walls and feces. The pricing conversation follows the same pattern that real sales training teaches. Cartman opens with a number that is enormous, stated with complete confidence as though this is the standard market rate for what he is offering. The number is designed to make the client understand they are in the presence of a premium service. Then he discounts it. The discount is immediate and significant, framed as a special consideration rather than an adjustment downward from an inflated opening figure. Then he discounts it again. By the end of the conversation, the price has dropped considerably from where it started, but the client now feels they have received something rather than simply agreed to something. This is not Cartman improvising. This is a pricing strategy that he has used before and understands the mechanics of well enough to execute naturally. The standard package involves the feces application. Cartman also presents the premium option, which involves killing the parents. He describes this option with exactly the same professional tone he used for the color swatches, as though it sits naturally in the same menu of available services, a higher price point for clients with more serious grievances and larger budgets. He does not flinch during this presentation. The premium option is on the table. The client can accept or decline. Stan declines both. His reasoning is that covering his parents' walls and feces does not actually solve his problem. His problem is that his parents lied to him and he wants them to acknowledge it. Property damage does not produce acknowledgement. He decides to handle the situation on his own without Cartman's involvement. Butters accepts the standard package without hesitation. He has been on the receiving end of parental decisions he did not deserve for long enough that the prospect of the Stotch household's walls being covered in a product from Cartman's color catalog feels like a proportionate response. He pays the fee. Cartman picks up the phone and begins speaking Spanish to the crew he has hired. This is one of the episode's quieter revelations. Cartman speaks fluent conversational Spanish. No explanation is provided for when or how this happened. It is presented as simply true, and its being true matters for the business because it means the operation has actual employees. There is a crew. They take instructions. They carry out jobs. The Parental Revenge Center is not a solo operation. The job at the Stotch household gets done. The crew goes in, applies the product, and leaves. Butters' parents come home to find the interior of their house extensively redecorated in ways they did not choose. They spend a moment processing the situation. Then they sit Butters down, not to punish him, but to apologize. They tell him about Motivation Corp. They admit they hired an actor to play his future self. They explain why they did it and acknowledge that the deception was wrong. They tell him the truth. The service worked. The client paid for a result, and the result was delivered. Stan's resolution happens separately and takes longer. Without Cartman's service, he has to find another way to force the admission from his parents, and his methods escalate with each failed attempt. At one point, he cuts off what appears to be his own hand with a meat cleaver to test whether the same injury appears simultaneously on the actor playing future Stan, which is the kind of extreme test that only makes sense to someone who has exhausted more reasonable options and decided that the stakes justify unusual measures. His parents resist the truth for longer than Butters did, coming up with increasingly strained explanations to maintain the fiction. Eventually, the whole thing falls apart and Randy admits what actually happened. Same outcome, no feces involved. This is where the episode's most interesting structural observation about the Parental Revenge Center lives. Two clients had the same basic problem. One used the business and got resolution. One did not use the business and also got resolution. The service is real, functional, and delivers what it promises, but the problem it addresses is reachable by other means as well. That makes it a convenience rather than a necessity. People pay for convenience, but they pay less for it, and some of them will choose not to pay at all if a free alternative is available. The deeper problem is even more fundamental. Every time the Parental Revenge Center completes a successful job, it removes a client from the market permanently. Butters' parents apologized and told the truth. The grievance that sent Butters to the phone book is gone. There is no reason for him to call the number again. The service that resolved his situation resolved it so completely that the situation no longer exists as a source of future revenue. A business whose clients stop needing it the moment it works is a business with a structural ceiling. The market for parental revenge services is not unlimited. It is the number of children in South Park whose parents have recently deceived them in a way that motivates those children to seek paid professional assistance rather than handling the situation themselves or simply moving on. That number is finite. Every successful engagement makes it smaller. Cartman did not appear to think about any of this when he was building the color swatches and hiring the crew and setting up the water cooler. He was focused on the job in front of him, the specific transaction with Butters, the specific fee, the specific result. The immediate mechanics of the business were handled well. The pricing strategy was sophisticated. The operational delivery was reliable. The workforce was professional, and the whole enterprise was pointed at a market that had no way to grow and every reason to shrink. This makes the Parental Revenge Center Cartman's most instructive early failure. And it is instructive specifically because it does not look like a failure at any point during its operation. The walls get covered, the client is satisfied, the parents apologize, the guarantee holds up. By every available measure of success within a single transaction, the business worked exactly as designed. The limitation was invisible during operation because limitations of this type only become visible when someone steps back far enough to see the whole market, rather than just the job in front of them. Cartman has never been good at stepping back. His natural orientation is toward the specific opportunity directly in front of him, the person who walked through the door, the fee on the table, the result that can be delivered today. Long-term market analysis requires a different kind of thinking, the kind that asks not just whether a single deal can be done, but whether enough deals exist to sustain an operation across time. That question never appears to have been asked. The Parental Revenge Center ends without drama. There is no raid, no lawsuit, no single bad decision that brings it down. It simply stops having customers. And when a business stops having customers, it stops being a business. The desk and the water cooler stay in Cartman's basement. The color swatches presumably get thrown out or forgotten. The crew presumably finds other work. The phone number stops ringing. What remains is the record of a business that operated correctly by most available measures and still had nowhere to go. The service was real. The product was delivered. The results held up to scrutiny. And none of that was enough to make the enterprise sustainable, because sustainability requires a market that keeps producing customers. And the Parental Revenge Center had built itself around a problem that disappeared the moment it was solved. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Parental Revenge Center worked perfectly and still ran out of road. The next business had the opposite problem. It found an enormous market, sold 1 million records, won an industry award, and collapsed in 2 words at the moment of its greatest success. Section 4. Faith Plus One. Destroyed in 2 words. Christian rock as a genre spent the 1990s doing something that most music industries would consider impossible. It grew enormous while remaining almost entirely invisible to the mainstream cultural conversation about popular music. The artists who dominated Christian charts during that decade were selling albums in quantities that would have generated significant coverage in any secular market context, and the format they worked in had developed a sophisticated commercial infrastructure, including dedicated radio networks, specialist retailers, award shows with their own certification systems, and a reliable audience whose consumption habits were driven by a relationship to the music that went beyond ordinary fan loyalty into something more closely resembling ongoing spiritual commitment. People who bought Christian rock were not just buying something they enjoyed. They were, in many cases, buying something that they felt participated in an important part of how they understood their lives. That relationship between product and consumer is the kind of thing that marketing professionals spend entire careers trying to manufacture artificially, and Christian rock had it organically, which meant the floor on its commercial performance was considerably more stable than anything in the secular market could promise. Creed was the specific example that Parker and Stone had in front of them when they wrote Christian Rock Hard, which aired on October 29, 2003, as the 9th episode of South Park's 7th season. Creed had achieved mainstream commercial success of a kind that very few acts in any genre manage, selling tens of millions of albums across their career, while simultaneously occupying a position in the Christian rock market that gave them access to both audiences at once. Their success was the clearest available evidence that the gap between Christian and secular music commerce was navigable in ways that had not always been obvious, and the criticism that followed them from both secular listeners who found their music derivative and Christian listeners who questioned their authenticity did not prevent any of it from happening. The commercial results existed regardless of what anyone thought about the artistic merit that produced it. Cartman had been watching all of this. The episode makes clear that his interest in Christian rock is not theological, not artistic, and not even particularly cynical in the way that deliberately exploiting a religious community's spending habits might be described as cynical. It is purely structural. He has identified a market with reliable demand, limited competition from acts he considers real rivals, and an audience whose emotional relationship to the product means they are not evaluating it by the same criteria that secular listeners apply. The core insight, stated by Cartman with the confidence of someone who believes he has found a gap in the market that everyone else has somehow missed, is that Christian rock is the easiest kind of commercially successful music to make. The bar for what counts as a meaningful spiritual experience in song form is wide enough that almost anything sincere can clear it, and sincerity, Cartman reasons, is easy to perform. The band called Moop is where the episode begins. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny have formed a garage band and are trying to develop their sound, which is the normal process for people who want to make music and are not yet sure what kind. Cartman wants to be in the band and has suggestions about direction. His suggestion, delivered with the confidence that attends all his suggestions, is that they should play Christian rock specifically because of the commercial logic he has already mapped out. The other boys find this insulting to the idea of making music for its own sake, which is a position that Cartman does not share and cannot really understand, and they ask him to leave. Being excluded from the band is not something Cartman accepts passively. It becomes the condition that makes the rest of the episode possible, because the need to prove the expelled member right is a much stronger motivational force than any ordinary interest in commercial music would have been. The bet with Kyle is the contractual foundation of everything that follows. The terms are straightforward. Whichever band goes platinum first wins. Kyle pays $10 to the loser. $10 is not a meaningful amount of money between fourth graders, but the bet is not really about $10. The bet is about who was right, and that question matters enough to both of them to sustain an entire episode's worth of effort on each side. Kyle commits to it because he believes that making music with integrity will produce a result more quickly than Cartman's approach can. Cartman commits to it because he believes the opposite, and because proving Kyle wrong has always been worth considerably more effort than the nominal prize attached to any particular contest. Forming Faith Plus One requires Cartman to recruit two people who will participate without fully understanding the framework they are participating in. Tolkien Black becomes the bassist despite never having played bass before, recruited through a process that does not describe itself as recruitment so much as opportunity presentation. Butterscotch takes the drums, which is the role Cartman assigns without particular consideration for whether Butters has any existing skill at it. The band is assembled not because its members have complementary abilities, but because they are available and willing to show up, which is the actual threshold for a band's formation in most cases at the fourth grade level. Cartman is the lead vocalist and keyboardist, which is the positioning of a frontman rather than a musician, and the distinction matters because everything that follows depends on his ability to perform conviction rather than produce something technically difficult. The songwriting method is where the episode locates its most precise satirical observation. Cartman does not write new songs. He takes existing love songs, most of them drawn from the emotional vocabulary of mainstream pop and rhythm and blues, and replaces the words that address the romantic object with the name Jesus. The logic is that love songs and devotional songs operate on the same emotional register, which is broadly true and has been observed by theologians and music scholars who study the relationship between sacred and secular lyrical traditions going back several centuries. Cartman has arrived at this observation through an entirely different route, which is that it requires no musical skill and can be executed in an afternoon, but the observation itself is not wrong. The replacement works because the underlying emotional architecture of the songs was already doing most of the required work. The substitution of Jesus for Baby does not break the songs. In many cases, it makes them function more powerfully for an audience whose attachment to the object being addressed is considerably more intense than their attachment to any romantic partner would be. The unintended consequence of the substitution method is what elevates the episode from satire into something genuinely strange. Love songs that are converted to devotional songs by simple word replacement retain all the physical and intimate language of their original form, which means Faith Plus One's catalog quickly fills with material that describes the relationship between the singer and Jesus in terms that are recognizably erotic without technically being anything other than expressions of spiritual devotion. The songs mean what Christian rock songs are supposed to mean. They also mean something else, simultaneously, without anyone involved in their creation having planned it that way. The double reading is not a flaw in the substitution method. It is an inherent property of the method, one that Cartman does not notice and would not have cared about if he had. Faith Records signs Faith Plus One after hearing the material, which represents the moment when the business plan achieves its first major structural milestone. A label deal means distribution, promotion, access to the infrastructure that turns recorded music into available product. It also means that a professional organization has evaluated the material and concluded that it meets whatever threshold Christian music requires for commercial viability. This evaluation by people with actual industry experience should be treated as evidence that the plan has merit, and the episode treats it as exactly that. Cartman is not bluffing his way through the label meeting. He has something real that the label wants. The album sells over 1 million copies. Kyle's band Moop, meanwhile, meanwhile, has become involved in the music piracy debate that was running at full volume in 2003. The year Metallica's lawsuit against file-sharing services had produced a cultural conversation about whether musicians were being robbed by the internet, or whether the complaint said more about musicians' feelings of entitlement than about any measurable harm. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny put Moop on strike until free downloading stops, which produces the specific kind of impasse that happens when an ordinary scale effort meets a structural problem too large for that scale to address. The strike draws support from major artists who join Moop's cause, but the cause cannot move the technology or the behavior it has already produced. And the strike eventually ends with the realization that playing for an audience is the part that matters, and the revenue model around it can be figured out separately. By the time this happens, Kyle has not made a platinum album, and Cartman has. The award ceremony is the moment where Cartman's relationship to the business he has built becomes fully visible. He has spent the album's entire revenue on the event itself, which is organized as an extravagant celebration of Faith Plus One's success, with the specific goal of forcing Kyle to acknowledge that Cartman was right and Kyle was wrong. The ceremony is not designed to advance the band's commercial position, or to build goodwill with the label, or to strengthen the relationship with the fan base. It is designed to be witnessed by Kyle at the moment of maximum humiliation. This is Cartman running a business for personal reasons again. The same instinct that turned the amusement park into a monument to exclusion instead of an income-generating asset. The money that should be in the account is in the room, converted from revenue into decor and catering and production in service of a grudge rather than a business strategy. The Myrrh record is what the label presents at the ceremony's peak. Christian music certification operates on a completely different system from secular music certification, rooted in the three gifts brought to Jesus at his birth in the nativity account. Albums in the Christian market go gold, frankincense, or myrrh, a system that has no platinum tier and was never designed to have one. Selling 1 million copies in Christian music produces a Myrrh record. Platinum does not exist in that market. Platinum has never existed in that market. The bet between Cartman and Kyle stipulated platinum, and platinum is something that the Christian music industry, by its own structural design, is constitutionally incapable of producing. Cartman has sold 1 million albums in a market that cannot give him the certification the bet required. And the thing that made the market so attractive in the first place, its self-contained nature and its dedicated audience, is exactly what makes it impossible to win the bet within it. The realization arrives in real time. Cartman processes what he is being told in front of the audience assembled to watch him win. He has made a band. The band has made an album. The album has sold over 1 million copies. The label is celebrating his success, and none of it counts because the terms of the bet specified a certification that this market does not offer and has never offered, and he did not check whether it offered it before spending a year building an enterprise designed to produce it. The rage this produces is the specific kind that comes from discovering a structural error after all the work has been done, and it cannot be directed at anyone other than the person who failed to check the terms before committing to them. He screams at the audience. He destroys the Myrrh record, and then, in front of the Christian rock fan base that has bought 1 million copies of his album and filled a venue to celebrate the music he made for them, he says the 2 words that dismantle everything the business spent its entire existence building. The effect is immediate and total. The audience that had just been applauding the ceremony stops. The bandmates who had trusted him with their participation are finished. The relationship between Faith Plus One and the people who made them successful ends in the moment the words leave his mouth. Not because what he said was theologically complex or required careful interpretation, but because it was the clearest possible signal that the person who had been performing devotion for 12 months did not share any of the feelings the music had claimed to represent. The performance collapsed. The business collapsed with it. Tolkien and Butters, who had given real time and actual effort to a band they believed was doing something legitimate, are left holding the aftermath of a business their lead singer destroyed in the space of a sentence because he discovered the rules of the market he entered too late to do anything useful with the information. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next venture he launched had no bet attached to it and no musical component at all. Only a pest control uniform, a basement full of imprisoned hippies, and a theory about what the town of South Park needed that turned out to be completely correct. Section 5. Die Hippie Die, the business that was right. South Park's 9th season premiered on March 9th, 2005, and its 2nd episode, which aired exactly 1 week later, is called Die Hippie Die. The title is the show's complete position on its subject, stated in 3 words, which is a level of editorial economy that Parker and Stone did not always pursue, but deployed here without any apparent ambivalence. The hippies in this episode are not being examined from a position of sympathetic complexity. They are being examined from the position of someone who finds them intolerable and has decided to do something about it. And that someone is, specifically, Eric Cartman, who has by the spring of 2005 reached a point in his relationship with hippies that can only be described as professional. He has studied them. He has developed operational protocols for dealing with them. He has built an infrastructure for removing them from locations where they are not welcome. And he has done all of this not because anyone asked him to, but because he identified a service gap in the South Park market and moved to fill it with the same complete confidence that he has brought to every business enterprise that preceded this one. The Hippie Extermination Service is, among all the ventures Cartman launches across South Park's run, the one most carefully built to resemble a legitimate pest control operation. The outfit is the first signal. He wears the uniform of someone who takes the work seriously, a reference to the Ghostbusters that the episode is clearly making without making it explicit, because the comparison is useful for establishing what kind of professional Cartman believes himself to be. The Ghostbusters were not dismissed as cranks when they showed up to deal with something the established authorities could not handle. They brought equipment and methodology and a theoretical framework for understanding the problem, and they charged for their services. Cartman has equipment in the form of whatever tools hippie removal requires. He has methodology in the form of a systematic approach to identifying hippie infestations and addressing them before they spread. He has a theoretical framework that is, within the internal logic of the episode, correct, and he charges for his services, which is what turns a personal obsession into a commercial enterprise. The year 2005 was a specific moment for the kind of gathering the episode is satirizing. The Iraq War was in its third year, and the protest culture around it had been building toward larger expressions of opposition for months. Music festivals with an explicitly political dimension had become a regular feature of the landscape, and the specific combination of jam bands, anti-corporate messaging, and collective identity that the episode targets was not an abstraction. It was something actively happening in college towns and open spaces across the country, which gave Cartman's threat assessment a specificity that more general satire would not have produced. He was not describing a hypothetical. He was describing something with a current address. The clients he has served before the episode begins represent the operational history of a functioning business. South Park residents have been calling the service to address hippie infestations in their attics and backyards, which is presented as a genuine problem with a genuine solution that Cartman's business is uniquely positioned to provide. Nobody else in South Park has invested the time and effort to develop the expertise. Nobody else has the equipment or the protocols or the willingness to go into spaces where hippies have established themselves and remove them systematically. The business exists because there is demand for what it offers, and the demand exists because the problem it addresses is real. The episode is not building toward a punchline about Cartman being wrong about hippies. The hippies in this episode are, by every available measure, exactly the problem Cartman says they are. The complication that exists before the episode's central crisis arrives is the basement. Cartman has been capturing hippies rather than simply removing them, and 63 of them are living in his basement by the time the story begins. This is, from a legal standpoint, a problem. From a business standpoint, it is also a problem, because a pest control operation that stockpiles its removed pests, rather than relocating or eliminating them, is not a sustainable model under any ordinary operating conditions. The hippies in the basement represent both Cartman's thoroughness and his failure to think through the logistics of his own methodology. He has caught more than he knew what to do with, and the solution he found for the surplus was the solution that made sense in the moment, which was to put them somewhere and deal with the question later. Later has arrived in the form of the town council discovering what is in his basement, and the town council's response is not the congratulations of people who have just learned that a constituent has been solving a problem on their behalf. His presentation to the town council is the episode's most carefully constructed comedy set piece before the main crisis begins. Cartman brings the full apparatus of expert testimony to the meeting, complete with charts and data and a rhetorical structure borrowed from disaster film scenarios of the period, specifically the kind where a scientist or engineer arrives at an official meeting with evidence of an approaching catastrophe that the officials are not ready to take seriously. The presentation describes what is coming, a music festival of unprecedented scale, organized by hippies who have been gathering in South Park from across the region, drawing more arrivals every day, on a trajectory that will produce the largest concentration of hippies in the state's recent history. The town council listens. They ask questions that reveal they have not followed the internal logic of what he is telling them, and then they have him arrested for imprisoning 63 people in his basement, which is, from a legal standpoint, not an unreasonable response to the information that 63 people are being kept in someone's basement against their will. The arrest just ends the hippie extermination service as a legal operating entity. The business is finished at the moment when it is most needed, which is not an irony the episode pauses to underline because the irony is too large and too obvious to require annotation. The service that existed to prevent the crisis the town is about to experience has been shut down by the same town that is about to experience the crisis. Cartman is in a cell. The hippies are gathering. The gap between what someone with operational expertise would be doing and what is actually happening is widening with every scene. The town's immediate response to the growing crowd is to try every option that normal civic authority provides, which collectively amount to nothing useful. The mayor issues a statement. The police assess the situation and determine the crowd has not technically violated any ordinance by existing. The council meets and produces a resolution calling for dialogue. None of this changes the size of the crowd or its direction. The gathering continues to grow because the mechanisms designed to address civic problems operate on the assumption that the people creating the problem recognize the authority being applied to them, and this crowd does not. Authority that is not recognized is not authority. It is just noise. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny's encounter with the hippie music festival represents the episode's secondary story, and it operates as the necessary human cost of the situation Cartman was trying to prevent. University of Colorado Boulder students, who are presented as the most sophisticated and most dangerous variety of hippie because they have academic credentials attached to their anti-corporate messaging, find the boys in the early stages of the gathering and begin exposing them to arguments about systemic injustice and the evils of corporate influence on government. The arguments are not presented as wrong, which is one of the episode's more interesting choices. The content of what the Boulder students are saying is more or less accurate as a description of real problems in the world. What the episode is targeting is the specific form the response takes, which is a music festival rather than any kind of action with practical consequences. Stan, Kyle, and Kenny get absorbed into the crowd, not because they are stupid, but because the appeal of a community organized around shared beliefs is genuinely powerful, and because the arguments being made are coherent enough to be convincing to people who have not yet developed the specific critical faculty that asks what any of this is actually going to produce. The crowd that forms around South Park is not a metaphor in the episode's construction. It is a physical entity with real properties that the show treats seriously, including the property of being impossible to navigate once it reaches a certain density. People are disappearing into it. The town is effectively occupied by something that arrived without being invited and cannot be asked to leave through any ordinary social mechanism because the people comprising it do not recognize the authority of the people asking. The mayor and the council and the adults of South Park are standing at the edges of a situation that their available tools cannot address, which is exactly what Cartman told them was going to happen in the presentation they ignored before having him arrested. The decision to go to Cartman is made by adults who have run out of other options, which is how this particular decision always gets made in South Park when Cartman is the one being approached. He does not get asked first because nobody wants to ask him first. He gets asked when everything else has been tried and the situation has reached a point where the cost of his involvement is lower than the cost of his continued absence. The dynamic is familiar from enough real-world situations that the episode does not need to explain it. The expert who was dismissed comes back as the last resort, and the expert's price for helping is the acknowledgement that the dismissal was a mistake, which is either extracted explicitly or simply implied by the humiliation of the asking. The hippie digger is the solution Cartman proposes. The name is exactly what it sounds like, a large drilling machine designed to bore a path through the center of the crowd, creating a channel through which something can be delivered to the crowd's interior. The something is music, specifically Slayer, which Cartman recommends with the confidence of someone who has studied what hippies cannot tolerate and identified it with scientific precision. The episode does not let this description go uncorrected, noting that the genre classification Cartman applies to Slayer is not accurate, but the correction does not matter to the business of the plan. The plan is not about genre classification. It is about the specific auditory properties of music that hippies find incompatible with the communal experience they are trying to have. And Cartman's identification of Slayer as the correct tool for this application turns out to be right regardless of what category the music belongs to. Chef being the one who operates the hippie digger through its most dangerous phase, when the machine overheats and has to be nursed through conditions it was not designed to survive, is the episode's way of providing the technical drama that disaster film parodies require. The drilling through the center of a massive crowd is presented with the same tonal seriousness that the films it references applied to similar scenarios, with everyone around the machine understanding that failure at this stage means the crowd does not disperse worse, and Stan and Kyle and Kenny remain embedded in a music festival that has consumed the town. The machine survives. The Slayer reaches the center of the crowd. The crowd responds exactly as Cartman's theory predicted, dispersing outward from the source of the sound with the speed of a community whose shared experience has been disrupted by something fundamentally incompatible with its values. Stan and Kyle and Kenny emerge from the dispersing crowd having experienced something and return from it. The show is not particularly interested in what they take away from the experience. It is interested in the larger fact that the crisis was resolved by the person who identified it before it happened and was arrested for his preparatory work before he could prevent it. The resolution of the crisis does not produce any formal rehabilitation of Cartman's professional status. No apology comes from the town council. No charges are dropped, with a statement acknowledging that the arrest contributed to the scale of the crisis it was supposed to prevent. He saved the town. He was correct about everything he described in the presentation they dismissed. None of that produces an official acknowledgement that arresting him was the specific error that allowed the situation to reach the scale it reached. The town moves on. The business does not reopen. What exists at the end of Die Hippie Die is the record of a service that operated, built real expertise, made a correct prediction about the most significant hippie-related event in South Park's history, and was shut down before it could act on that prediction. The business was right. Its operator was arrested. The market it served was real. The service it offered worked. And none of that was enough to keep it running past the moment when the authorities decided that 63 people in a basement was a more pressing legal concern than a hippie infestation in its early stages. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next venture had no such ambiguity about its methods, and no external authority to shut it down. Only a real singer, a Chinese mafia, and the specific realization that every business exploiting other people's talent is built on something it cannot sustain. Section 6. The Super Awesome Talent Agency. Exploitation with a water cooler. Tolkien Black won a singing contest. The prize was $200 and a spot performing at the Miss Colorado pageant. That is the entire event that triggers this story. A fourth grader won a small regional competition, earned a modest fee for one appearance, and had not yet left the school cafeteria before Cartman had already decided that 20% of $200 belonged to him. The episode is called Wing. The third episode of South Park's 9th season aired March 23, 2005. The DVD commentary from Parker and Stone is unusually direct about what the episode is trying to say. Talent agents, they explain, are Chinese slave traders. That is the thesis. The episode spends 22 minutes proving it. The Super Awesome Talent Agency is established in Cartman's basement. Same basement, same desk, same water cooler as before. The water cooler in particular has become a signature element of how Cartman stages a business environment. It does not serve any functional purpose for an operation run by 4 children. It is there because Cartman believes offices have water coolers, and an office with a water cooler looks more serious than one without. He is right about this, which is depressing. The founding philosophy of the agency gets delivered with the same confidence Cartman brings to all his business pitches. He explains that talent is not required to make money in the entertainment industry. What is required is the ability to identify talent in someone else and then take a percentage of everything that talent earns for as long as the relationship continues. The agency does not perform. The agency does not create anything. The agency facilitates the connection between the person who can do something and the people willing to pay to see it, and takes 20% of every transaction that results from that connection forever, or until the talent finds a better deal. This is an accurate description of how talent agencies work. Cartman is not exaggerating it or adding anything sinister to it for comedic effect. He is simply stating the model plainly and treating it as obviously smart, which is itself the joke. Every other person in the conversation would soften the description or find more flattering language for it. Cartman does not see any reason to do that. Getting Tolkien to sign is harder than Cartman expected. Tolkien is not immediately convinced that 4 classmates running an agency out of a basement represent the professional management infrastructure his career requires following a $200 beauty pageant engagement. He is skeptical in the specific way that any reasonable person would be skeptical when presented with an offer that seems primarily designed to benefit the people making it. Cartman's response to this skepticism is to make the counter-argument that talent agencies always make to reluctant talent. He explains that the entertainment industry is dangerous for an unrepresented performer, that without an agency, someone will take advantage of the career opportunity and the performer will be left with nothing, that the agency's expertise and relationships will protect Tolkien from exactly the kind of exploitation that would otherwise happen to him, that the 20% is not a cost, but an investment in his safety. This argument is delivered sincerely and without any visible awareness that the person making it is, by his own founding philosophy, planning to do exactly what he is warning Tolkien about. Tolkien signs. The agency has one client for approximately one scene before Don Heisman arrives. Don Heisman is a real agent from a real agency with real resources and a real track record. He finds Tolkien and makes an offer that a professional operation with actual industry connections can make, and the super awesome talent agency cannot match it. Tolkien leaves with Heisman without particular drama. The agency has lost its only client to something it can never compete with, which is an actual professional operation with things to offer beyond a water cooler and confident delivery. Wing arrives because the episode needs the agency to have a second client, and because Wing is a real person. This is worth pausing on for a moment. Wing Han Seng is an actual New Zealand singer who, in the early 2000s, developed a devoted internet following through her recordings of pop cover songs delivered in a style so uniquely her own that the gap between the material she chose and her delivery of it became the entire appeal. She is genuinely talented in the sense that what she does is completely distinctive and cannot be mistaken for anyone else. She agreed to appear in the episode and to have her real name and real singing used throughout. In the episode, Wing is the wife of Tuong Lu Kim, the owner of the City Walk restaurant. She has been smuggled into the United States by the Chinese mafia at a cost of $10,000 that Tuong Lu Kim cannot pay. The mafia's interest in Wing is straightforward. They believe her singing ability has commercial value, and they intend to collect their investment plus whatever additional revenue her career can produce through whatever means become necessary if Tuong Lu Kim does not pay what he owes. Tuong Lu Kim brings Wing to the super awesome talent agency because it is the only agency he knows about. The boys accept her as a client because they have no other clients, and because, despite the situation with the mafia, her talent is immediately and obviously real. The arrangement they agree to is a standard representation deal. The agency will get Wing bookings, Wing will perform, the agency will take its percentage. What the agency can actually do for Wing at the level of resources and relationships available to 4 fourth graders in Colorado is a question the episode does not answer directly. Instead, it answers the question of what the agency tries to do, which is to get Wing in front of audiences through whatever access is available. The first attempt is American Idol, which is where Cartman believes Wing's talent belongs, and where the competition format will expose her to the widest possible audience in the shortest possible time. The Contender is where she ends up instead. The Contender was a real reality competition program that aired in 2005, built around professional boxing. Wing performs during a match. She sings while a professional boxer hits her. The agency is nominally managing this arrangement, meaning they agreed to it and are receiving the percentage associated with it, while their client takes physical damage in a boxing ring as part of a performing commitment they arranged on her behalf. This sequence is where the episode's central argument becomes visible in a form that does not require any explanation. The talent is performing. The agency is getting paid. The performance is occurring under conditions that are harmful to the performer. The agency's response to the harmful conditions is to continue receiving the percentage. The gap between what the agency claims to provide, protection and opportunity, and what it actually provides, a booking in a boxing ring while someone hits the client, is the gap between what talent agencies say they are and what they actually do when their financial interest is not aligned with their client's well-being. Sylvester Stallone's people contact the agency about having Wing perform at Stallone's birthday party. This is the first legitimate career opportunity that has presented itself, the kind of high-profile booking that could actually advance Wing's position in the entertainment world by attaching her name to a recognizable event with wealthy and connected guests. The agency is at the closest point it will ever reach to doing what it claimed it could do when it sold Tolkien on the 20% arrangement. The Chinese mafia collects Wing before the Stallone booking can happen. The boys find out Wing has been taken and go after the people who took her, believing they are dealing with a rival talent agency that has stolen their client. This misreading is the episode's structural joke. The boys cannot tell the difference between a talent agency and an organized crime operation because the episode is arguing that the difference between the two is smaller than most people assume. Both parties have a financial claim on Wing's ability to perform. Both parties intend to benefit from that ability without sharing the benefit with Wing in any proportionate way. Both parties will apply pressure to maintain their position. The surface presentation is different. The underlying arrangement is the same. The confrontation between the boys and the mafia happens at the location where Wing is being held. There are guns. There is a standoff. Kyle says something about Kenny being killed during the chaos that produces one of the episode's stranger moments. And then both sides arrive at the same realization at roughly the same time. What they are doing is wrong. Both both of them. The Chinese mafia is exploiting Wing through coercion. The super awesome talent agency is exploiting Wing through contract. The mechanism is different, the dynamic is not. Both parties are extracting commercial value from another person's ability to sing without giving that person a meaningful share of what the extraction produces. The mafia paid $10,000 to smuggle her into the country and considers that investment a claim on her future earnings. The agency negotiated a percentage arrangement and considers that contract a similar claim. The episode frames these two things as morally equivalent, which is uncomfortable, and it is supposed to be. Both the boys and the mafia decide to stop what they are doing. Everyone quits. The guns go down. The standoff ends. Wing sings at a wedding because she was hired to sing at a wedding before all of this happened, and she is going to fulfill that commitment regardless of what the people claiming percentages of her income are doing. Tolkien is waiting tables at the venue. He is trying to earn enough money to get home after the real agency that took him on did not actually do anything useful for his career either. He shows up not in a performer's position, but in a service worker's position, clearing plates while Wing performs. The agency that had actual resources and industry connections and a professional infrastructure produced the same outcome for Tolkien that the super awesome talent agency would have produced. Nothing. Maybe less than nothing, because at least with the boys, he would not have had to travel to a venue and wait tables to get home. Cartman sees Tolkien waiting tables and tells him he told him so. This is factually accurate in the narrow sense that Cartman did predict something bad would happen to Tolkien if he left without proper representation. What Cartman does not acknowledge is that the thing he predicted would happen to Tolkien is approximately what would have happened anyway, because the alternative he was offering was a basement operation with no real industry access. His prediction came true, but not because of anything the agency he built could have prevented. The final image of Tolkien waiting tables and Wing singing is the episode's clearest statement of what talent agencies, good ones and bad ones, large ones and small ones, consistently fail to do, which is share the commercial value they extract from performers with the performers who generate it. Wing is still there performing. She was always going to be good at singing regardless of whether anyone took 20% of it. Tolkien had genuine ability that real audiences responded to. The agencies around them extracted percentages and provided access and took credit, and in both cases left the people with the actual talent in roughly the same position they were in before anyone got involved. The super awesome talent agency ended when its founders understood in real time that what they were doing and what the people holding Wing at gunpoint were doing were the same thing. That is a faster and more honest ending than most talent agencies get. Most of them do not arrive at that understanding at all. They continue taking percentages and calling it representation and issuing press releases about their roster until something external stops them, a lawsuit or a bankruptcy or a client who gets famous enough to afford a different agency. Cartman's version ended the moment the comparison became impossible to ignore. The water cooler stayed in the basement. The desk stayed in the basement. The agency stopped being an agency the moment its founders admitted what it was. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The super awesome talent agency ended when its founders realized they were doing the same thing as the people they were fighting. The next venture had no such moment of clarity. Instead, it had a sports league, crack-addicted babies, and a corporation that waited until all the paperwork was signed before taking everything. Section 7. The Crack Baby Athletic Association. The hostile takeover. The NCAA makes somewhere between $1 and $2 billion a year from college sports. The athletes who produce that revenue receive scholarships, housing, and meals. They do not receive money. The official explanation for why they do not receive money is that accepting money would compromise their amateur status. And amateur status is what separates college sports from professional sports. And that separation matters because it affects how the universities that run college programs are taxed and regulated. This argument has been made consistently for decades by the people who benefit most from the current arrangement, and challenged consistently by everyone else. South Park's 15th season episode, Crack Baby Athletic Association, aired May 25th, 2011, and it takes that NCAA model and applies it to the most extreme possible parallel situation it can find. The result is one of the most precisely constructed pieces of satire the show produced in its middle seasons, and also one of the most uncomfortable to watch, which is exactly how it was designed. Cartman is already running the operation when Kyle arrives at the Colorado Medical Center to volunteer. Kyle went to the hospital because he saw a Sarah McLachlan commercial about crack-addicted babies and felt genuinely bad. He wanted to help. What he found instead was Cartman, Craig, Clyde, and Butters filming crack-addicted infants fighting each other over a small piece of crack cocaine and uploading the footage online for paying viewers. The business model is simple. Crack babies are addicted to crack before they are born because their mothers use during pregnancy. The addiction is real and it produces genuinely distressing behavior when the babies are denied the substance. Cartman identified this distressing behavior as content, built an audience around it, and structured the operation with the efficiency of someone who had thought carefully about supply, demand, and how to keep costs low. The babies are in a hospital. The hospital does not charge him for access because he is officially listed as a volunteer. The crack is cheap. The filming equipment is basic. The margins are good. Kyle is horrified. He is also immediately invited to join management. This is Cartman's most effective recruitment tactic, and he uses it here with precision. Rather than try to convince Kyle that the operation is ethical, he offers Kyle money, a title, and the ability to shape what the operation does with its profits. The offer makes Kyle a participant before he has decided whether he approves of what he is participating in. By the time he realizes the distinction matters, he is already inside the organization. The justification Kyle builds for himself follows the same logic that organizations running similar models have always used. The babies are addicted regardless of whether the footage exists. Their situation predates the business and will continue after it. The operation is not causing harm. It is finding commercial value in a situation that was already harmful. The money can be used to help the babies through the orphanage Kyle wants to build. The whole thing, framed correctly, is not exploitation, but opportunity. Stan disagrees from the beginning and continues disagreeing throughout the episode. He does not produce an elaborate counter-argument. He just looks at what is happening and says it is wrong. This is the role Stan plays in the show's moral structure at its most functional. He is not smarter than anyone else, he just has not been offered money yet. Cartman's research trip to the University of Colorado Boulder is where the episode's satirical argument gets stated most directly. He wants to understand how the NCAA avoids paying the athletes whose performances generate its revenue, so he can apply the same logic to the Crack Baby Athletic Association. He goes to meet with the university's dean wearing a 19th century plantation owner costume, complete with the hat, the coat, the accents, and the rhetorical posture of someone who considers themselves a respected businessman operating within the norms of their time. The dean throws him out. The costume is not subtle. It is not trying to be. The point is that the labor arrangement Cartman is describing, where a population of people performs physical activity that generates substantial revenue for an organization that provides them support and facilities but not money, has a historical precedent that the NCAA's defenders would prefer to leave unexamined. Cartman examines it directly. The dean's discomfort with the examination is the joke, and also the argument. Back in South Park, the operation grows. Kyle convinces Cartman to use a portion of the profits to fund an orphanage for the crack babies. This is the move that makes Kyle's continued involvement feel sustainable to himself. The orphanage gives the operation a charitable dimension that converts exploitation into something with a redemptive endpoint. Kyle needs the orphanage to be real because without it, the justifications stop working. He is not cynical about this. He genuinely wants to build the orphanage. That is what makes his eventual position in the story so specific and uncomfortable. Cartman agrees to the orphanage plan immediately, which should be a signal but is not read as one. He agrees because a planned orphanage is good public relations. A business that films crack babies fighting can point to its orphanage commitments and shift the conversation toward its charitable intentions. Kyle's genuine desire to help the babies is, from the operational perspective, a narrative asset. Cartman has no objection to Kyle having real feelings about things, as long as those feelings produce outcomes useful to the business. EA Sports finds them the way large corporations find small operations that have built something commercially viable. Not aggressively, not visibly, not in a way that makes clear what is about to happen. Peter Moore, the head of EA Sports, arrives dressed in a way that mirrors Cartman's plantation owner costume almost exactly. The same hat, the same coat, the same southern affect, the same posture of a man conducting legitimate business that other people might describe differently if they were allowed to use different words. The episode makes this visual connection explicit and then leaves it alone. Both men are wearing the same costume. Both men are making the same argument about why the people generating value for their organization do not need to be paid for generating it. The only difference between them is scale and legal standing. And legal standing is what allows one of them to make the same argument successfully where the other one got thrown out of a dean's office. Peter Moore wants to partner with the Crack Baby Athletic Association. The deal he presents involves EA Sports taking the rights to the operation's content and commercializing it through EA's existing distribution infrastructure. The boys will retain their roles in the organization. The orphanage will move forward. Everyone benefits. The contract gets signed. Nobody reads it carefully enough. EA Sports owns everything. The rights to the content, the footage, the brand, the operation itself. itself. All revenue generated by the Crack Baby Athletic Association from the point of signing forward belongs to EA Sports under the terms of the agreement. The percentage allocated to the boys is 0. The money for the orphanage is gone because the money itself is gone. Kyle's plan for what the profits would accomplish does not appear anywhere in the contract because the profits no longer belong to anyone who would direct them toward that plan. Kyle's reaction when he understands what happened is the reaction of someone who has just discovered that the contractual language of a business transaction does not reflect the verbal assurances that accompanied it. This discovery is not unusual in the history of businesses being acquired by larger entities. Companies with more experience in negotiations consistently produce contracts that favor their position over the position of the party with less experience. The boys negotiated against professionals. The professionals won. Cartman's response is notably quieter than the rage that usually accompanies his losses. He was outmaneuvered by a version of himself, a larger, better resourced, more legally protected version, but the same underlying model. Taking value from something vulnerable, justifying it through the language of opportunity and support, and structuring the paperwork so that challenging the arrangement requires resources the other party does not have. EA Sports did to the Crack Baby Athletic Association exactly what the Crack Baby Athletic Association did to the babies. The circularity of this is complete, and Cartman appears to understand it, which is perhaps why his response involves less shouting than usual. Stan's consistent position throughout the episode ends up being the correct one, not because he understood the business better than anyone else, but because he never allowed himself to get close enough to it to need justifications. Staying outside the operation meant staying outside the financial arrangements that made the operation's problems invisible from the inside. He did not have a percentage to protect or an orphanage to fund. He just had a clear view of what was happening, and what was happening was wrong. And being right about that from the beginning did not require any particular intelligence. It required not being offered money. The orphanage gets built anyway. The episode ends with Kyle and Stan finding it under construction, and inside it they find a guitar and a hat belonging to Slash. The guitarist, who the episode has been simultaneously revealing is a fictional character in the tradition of Santa Claus. Parents dress up as Slash to maintain the fiction for children who believe in him. The orphanage being built by someone who does not officially exist is the episode's answer to the question of how something good happens after everything that was supposed to produce it has been stripped away. It does not happen through business. It happens through something the business cannot account for and did not build. This ending matters for understanding what the episode is actually arguing. The Crack Babies have somewhere to go. The operation that was supposed to fund that outcome has been dissolved by a corporation that applied the same logic the operation itself used. The orphanage exists anyway, attributed to a myth, which is the show's way of saying that charitable outcomes and commercial operations are not the same thing and do not require each other. Kyle spent the episode trying to make them the same thing. EA Sports separated them completely by taking the commercial part. The charitable part appeared overnight from a source that operates outside commercial logic entirely. The Crack Baby Athletic Association's failure is structurally different from every failure that came before it in this history. Fingerbang never got off the ground. The Parental Revenge Center ran out of customers. Faith Plus One got destroyed from the inside by Cartman's own mouth. The Super Awesome Talent Agency collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. The Crack Baby Athletic Association was taken, not destroyed by a bad decision or an outburst or a market miscalculation, taken by a larger organization that identified its commercial value and acquired it through a contract signed by people who did not understand the contract. This is how most small businesses that build something genuinely valuable actually end, not in a dramatic moment of personal failure. In a boardroom with lawyers and paperwork that everybody signed, and a distribution of outcomes that was determined by who had more experience with the specific type of document being signed and what its standard clauses tend to mean in practice. The boys had no such experience. Peter Moore had spent his career in exactly those rooms. The result was predictable to everyone except the people who signed. Kyle went to the hospital to help crack babies and ended up briefly running a business that exploited them, then watched a corporation take that business over and keep all the money, then found an orphanage built by a fictional guitarist. He did not come away from the experience with a clear framework for how to feel about it. The episode does not give him one. It gives him Slash's hat and guitar in an empty room and a building going up outside, and Stan standing next to him equally confused, and no further explanation than that. The lesson the episode offers is not about business strategy or contract review or the ethics of content monetization. It is about what happens when commercial logic is applied to something it was never designed to address. When the gap between the revenue a system generates and the welfare of the people who generate it becomes large enough that it requires active justification to maintain. And when the active justification eventually produces produces an arrangement that captures only the revenue while outsourcing the welfare obligation to a fictional rock guitarist who apparently builds orphanages overnight. EA Sports is still a company. The NCAA still does not pay its athletes, though a recent Supreme Court decision has begun changing the edges of that arrangement. The crack babies in the episode have their orphanage. Nobody who signed the paperwork is better off than they were before the paperwork existed, except for Peter Moore, who got a content library and kept all the money. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Crack Baby Athletic Association was absorbed by a corporation running the same model at a larger scale. The next business had no corporation waiting at the end of the negotiations, just a secret ingredient, a food cart outside Cartman's house, and a best friend who eventually decided to look at something he had been choosing not to look at. Section 8, Cartman Burger, the secret that destroyed everything. October 5th, 2011 is when the 8th episode of South Park's 15th season aired, and the episode carries a title that the show delivers with complete and deliberate commitment: Asperger's. The word Asperger, which refers to a developmental condition that was at that time classified separately from autism spectrum disorder before a subsequent revision to the diagnostic manual consolidated the categories, sounds like two other words when read aloud by a fourth grader with a specific pronunciation style. And the episode builds its entire commercial premise on this accident of phonology. Cartman is diagnosed with a condition whose name he misunderstands completely, and the misunderstanding produces a business model that is simultaneously the most disgusting thing he has ever sold and the most commercially successful product he has ever brought to market. The discovery happens by accident, which is the origin story that food product legends prefer. Cartman, working through the practical implications of a diagnosis he believes requires him to put hamburgers in his underwear, discovers that hamburgers held against his body for a period of time acquire a flavor that is, by every available measure of customer response, extraordinary. Kyle is the first person to eat one without knowing what the preparation process involved, and his reaction is the reaction of someone experiencing food that is genuinely better than any available alternative, rather than someone eating something they have been told is good. This distinction matters because Kyle's palate functions as a reliable instrument in this scene. He is not performing enthusiasm for Cartman's benefit or attempting to be supportive. He is having a genuine sensory experience, and the experience tells him that what he is eating is remarkable. The decision to go into business together is the moment where everything the episode is going to do becomes possible. Kyle proposes the partnership, and Cartman accepts it with the speed of someone who has been waiting for exactly this kind of validation from exactly this kind of person. Kyle's endorsement of the product is worth more than any other endorsement Cartman could receive at this stage, because Kyle's resistance to Cartman's schemes is the show's most reliable indicator of a scheme's merit. Kyle does not help Cartman with things he believes are wrong or stupid. His willingness to involve himself with Cartman Burger functions as a quality signal that the episode is careful to establish before the business begins generating its wider customer response. The cart that Cartman sets up outside his house is not sophisticated infrastructure. It does not need to be, because the product is doing everything a product needs to do at the point of purchase, which is producing the customer response that makes the customer come back and tell someone else. Word travels quickly. The line at Cartman Burger grows. People who have never been particularly interested in hamburgers find themselves returning to the cart with a frequency and enthusiasm that surprises them, and that they attribute to some ineffable quality of the product rather than any specific ingredient. This is the response that every food business wants, and that most food businesses spend enormous amounts of money trying to engineer through flavor science and marketing research and consumer testing. Cartman Burger is generating it without any of that infrastructure, which is itself a kind of argument about the relationship between what people experience and what they believe they are experiencing. The fast food industry's response to Cartman Burger is where the episode moves from a story about a disgusting business into something more precisely targeted at the commercial dynamics of competitive food markets. The major chains lose business. The loss is significant enough to require a response at the executive level, which means a meeting in a setting designed to convey the kind of seriousness that corporate strategy discussions are supposed to have. Representatives of the most recognizable fast food brands in the country gather to address the question of what Cartman Burger is doing that they are not doing, and how to either replicate it or neutralize it. The meeting has the visual and procedural language of a conspiracy, complete with the dimly lit room and the representatives who communicate through a combination of genuine alarm and performed calm. Their analysis of the product arrives at a conclusion that is simultaneously accurate and entirely wrong about the mechanism producing the effect. They determine that Cartman's burgers contain some combination of their their own ingredients, infused through a process involving a specific kind of gas, which suggests that the product has somehow achieved the synthesis of everything the major chains individually offer. This reading of the evidence is the kind of logical error that happens when people with a commercial interest in a particular answer work backwards from the outcome they need to explain, rather than forwards from the actual evidence. The burgers do contain something that the major chains are not producing. The something is not a synthetic combination of their recipes. It is a natural product of Cartman's body that has been infused into the meat during the preparation process. The chains are in the right neighborhood of understanding, without being anywhere near the specific address where the answer lives. Stan arrives at this meeting through a set of circumstances that the episode develops in parallel to the Cartman burger story, and that are connected to a longer arc running through the season. Stan has been experiencing a form of profound cynicism since the previous episode, a condition in which everything around him appears and sounds different from how other people experience it, specifically worse and more honest about its own emptiness. A group that Stan encounters has organized around this experience, managing it through the consumption of whiskey, which functions in their community the way any substance functions in any community that has built itself around shared management of an unbearable perception. These people, who style themselves as cynics, are the ones who know the truth about things and find the truth unsupportable without chemical assistance. Their knowledge makes them dangerous in the specific way that knowledge often makes people dangerous in South Park, which is that it gives them something to do that they mistake for significance. Stan being sent to the fast food meeting while incapacitated by whiskey is the episode's way of connecting its two threads at the moment of maximum contrast. The Cartman burger thread is about a business built on a secret that produces extraordinary results. The Stan thread is about a person who has learned a truth that makes ordinary experience unbearable, and is trying to find a way to be in the world anyway. The meeting, from Stan's perspective, is a scene he cannot fully process. From the fast food chain's perspective, Stan is an asset in the investigation, someone who has access to Cartman Burger's operations and might be persuaded to reveal information that could be turned into competitive advantage. The interrogation that follows Stan losing consciousness is presented as corporate intelligence gathering, which is a real category of activity that real companies engage in through legal and occasionally less legal means. Kyle's discovery of the secret ingredient is the moment the business ends, and it arrives not through any elaborate investigation, but through the simple act of paying attention to something he had been choosing not to examine too carefully. Kyle knew that the burgers were exceptional. Kyle knew that Cartman was the person preparing them. Kyle had available to him, if he chose to look, information that would lead him directly to the answer. He chose not to look, which is the choice that makes the business partnership possible and comfortable and profitable. The moment he decides to look is the moment the partnership becomes something different, and what it becomes is a situation in which Kyle possesses information that he cannot pretend he does not have. The exposure of the secret works the way most product revelations work in the modern commercial environment, which is quickly and completely. Kyle tells people what he discovered. The information spreads. The customer base that had been returning to Cartman Burger with enthusiasm and frequency arrives at the information and makes the same calculation that Kyle made, which is that there is a difference between food that tastes good and food that tastes good because of a process the customer would not have agreed to if they had understood it in advance. The distinction matters to people. It matters more than the taste, which is itself a kind of argument about the relationship between information and preference, about whether what people enjoy is the experience itself or the experience combined with their understanding of what the experience is and where it came from. Cartman Burger closes. The fast food chains that had been losing business to it do not recover that business through any clever counter strategy or improved product. They recover it simply because the product they were losing business to is no longer available. The competitive advantage that Cartman Burger had built through its preparation method is inseparable from the preparation method, which is now public knowledge and which customers have determined they would prefer to avoid. The business was built on a secret. The secret's disclosure is identical to the business's dissolution. Kyle's role in the closure makes this failure structurally different from every previous Cartman business failure. The amusement park was taken by the IRS. The Christian rock band was destroyed by Cartman's own mouth. The talent agency collapsed through ethical realization. The Crack Baby organization was absorbed by a corporation. Cartman Burger was exposed by the business partner who had the most direct access to what the business was actually doing, the person who was closest to the operation and had the most specific knowledge of its methods and the most credibility with the customer base when he described what he had found. Kyle was not an external auditor or a regulatory body or a corporate rival. He was inside the business, and his decision to look at something he had been looking away from is what ended it. The relationship between what Kyle knew and what he chose to examine is the episode's episode's most honest observation about how people participate in enterprises that they would prefer not to examine too carefully. Kyle had all the information he needed to understand what Cartman Burger was before he decided to investigate. He had watched Cartman prepare the burgers. He knew the preparation process involved Cartman's body in some way that he had declined to specify to himself. The decision not to specify, to enjoy the product and the profits without investigating the mechanism, was available to him as long as he made it. He unmade it for reasons the episode does not spell out in detail. Perhaps because the specific moment when someone decides to stop looking away from something is rarely dramatic enough to require a detailed account of its own causes. Cartman's response to being exposed is not the extended rage that Faith Plus One's destruction produced, or the legal and financial scrambling that Cartman Land's collapse required. The exposure is clean and quick, and produces a conclusion that has the same completeness as the secret's original concealment. The business was built on something hidden. The hiding stopped. The business stopped with it. What remained was the cart, and the memory of a line of customers who had been genuinely satisfied with a product they now wished they had not eaten. And Cartman, who had found a preparation method that worked, converted it into a commercial enterprise that grew faster than most of his previous ventures, and watched it end at the moment a business partner decided that looking closely was more important than staying comfortable. The fast food chains meeting in a dim room to plan their response to a child selling burgers from a cart outside his house is the episode's clearest image of what Cartman Burger actually represented to the industry. Not a competitor in any formal sense. Not an organization with the structure or resources to challenge their market position in any sustained way. But a product that did something their products were not doing, generated a customer response their products were not generating, and did it through a method that their resources and research and flavor science could not replicate, because the method was not something any of their researchers would have considered investigating. The market gap that Cartman identified and filled was a gap that could only exist while the secret remained a secret. The business existed for exactly as long as the secret did, and not a moment longer. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Cartman Burger fell the moment the preparation process became public knowledge. The next business Cartman built had no secret ingredient and no preparation process to expose. Only a trademark dispute, a crowdfunding platform, and an NFL franchise that decided the name of a startup company was worth burning a building down over. Section 9. The Washington Redskins. The name that nobody was using. Trademarks expire. They get canceled, disputed, and left in legal limbo while courts and agencies work out whether the original registration should have been granted. Most of the time, nobody outside the relevant industry notices. A small company loses its brand protection, quietly rebrands, and nothing dramatic happens because the stakes are small and the audience for the outcome is narrow. The Washington Redskins situation in 2014 was different because the stakes were enormous and the audience was the entire American sports media. The United States Patent and Trademark Office ruled in June of that year that the Washington Redskins trademark was disparaging to Native Americans and should not have been granted. The registration was canceled. The team appealed immediately and continued using the name while the legal process played out. But for a period of genuine legal uncertainty, the name and logo that had identified one of the NFL's oldest franchises existed in a space where normal protections did not fully apply. Anyone could use them. No legal mechanism existed to stop it. Cartman saw this in the news and immediately understood something the NFL's legal department had not thought to worry about. A group of fourth graders looking for a startup name had no trademark to protect and no reputation to maintain, and therefore nothing to lose by using a name that a billion-dollar franchise could not currently defend. The episode is called Go Fund Yourself, the season 18 premiere, which aired September 24th, 2014, 3 months after the trademark ruling. Parker and Stone built episodes around news stories close to their air date, and this one landed at the exact moment when two separate cultural conversations, the Washington Redskins name controversy and the explosion of Kickstarter as a crowdfunding platform, were running simultaneously at full volume. The episode finds the overlap between them and pulls hard on it. The boys want to start a company. The motivation has nothing to do with any product or service they want to provide. They want to leave school. The startup economy of 2014 had developed a visible mythology around the idea that the right company name and a compelling Kickstarter campaign could generate enough funding to allow founders to work on their idea full-time, which in practice meant not having to do other things they did not want to do. The boys have decided the startup model is a way to opt out of school permanently, and they are not entirely wrong about this as a theoretical possibility, given how the crowdfunding environment was functioning confusing at that moment. Finding a name turns out to be harder than expected. Every name they consider is already taken. The naming landscape for technology startups in 2014 was genuinely crowded, full of short, abstract words and deliberate misspellings and combinations of existing words that had been registered by companies that may or may not still exist. The boys go through option after option and find each one unavailable. Finding an available name that did not sound like a second choice required either significant creative effort or willingness to accept something that immediately communicated compromise. Cartman solves this by looking sideways at the problem, rather than continuing to search within the same pool of available options. The Washington Redskins trademark has been canceled. The name is not owned by anyone in a way that can currently be enforced. The logo, similarly, exists in legal limbo during the appeal. A startup calling itself the Washington Redskins and using the associated visual identity is not doing anything that anyone can currently stop through legal channels. The gap is real, specific, and limited in duration because the appeal will eventually resolve. But right now, the name is available in a way that no other recognizable name is. Kyle objects on the grounds that the name is offensive to Native Americans, which is the same objection the trademark office used to cancel it. Cartman's response is that the name being offensive is the NFL's problem, not theirs. They are a startup company that happens to share a name with a football team, and the football team's image problems do not transfer by virtue of the shared name. Kyle recognizes that this argument is technically coherent and morally uncomfortable and accepts it, which is how most people respond to arguments like that when the financial incentive to accept them is large enough. The startup launches on Kickstarter. The business model is what makes the episode work as satire because the business model is nothing. The Washington Redskins startup does not have a product, a service, a development timeline, or a proof of concept. It has a name, a logo, and a Kickstarter page, and it is asking people to fund a company that will, once funded, continue to exist without producing anything. Cartman describes this approvingly as the boys sitting on their backs while money arrives. This is accurate and also the specific version of startup culture that Kickstarter's critics had been describing as a problem since the platform became successful enough to attract criticism. Backers arrive, money comes in, the campaign accumulates funding at a rate that surprises even Cartman, which suggests that either the name recognition of the Washington Redskins drives clicks, regardless of what the campaign is actually for, or enough people backed the campaign as a statement about the trademark controversy without reading what they were funding, or both. The media coverage of the trademark dispute works in the startup's favor in a way that no marketing budget could have purchased. Every news segment that mentions the canceled trademark and the ongoing legal fight is indirectly advertising a Kickstarter campaign that shares the contested name. People who search for updates on the controversy find the startup. People who want to make a statement about the NFL's handling of the name issue find a place to put money without those funds going anywhere near the NFL itself. The controversy is the marketing. Cartman spent nothing on promotion and received the kind of sustained media attention that most startups spend their entire seed round trying to manufacture. Daniel Snyder finds out and comes to South Park to confront Cartman directly. The conversation that follows is built around a specific asymmetry. Snyder has enormous resources, legal representation, institutional relationships, and decades of experience protecting the Washington Redskins brand. Cartman is 9 years old with a Kickstarter page. In this specific situation, at this specific moment, Cartman has more legal standing because Snyder cannot enforce a trademark that is currently canceled. Snyder knows more about intellectual property law than Cartman does. He also cannot do anything with that knowledge while the cancellation is in effect. Cartman is aware of this power balance and enjoys it completely. He refuses to change the name. He refuses to engage with the argument that using it causes harm to the franchise or to Native Americans. He does not deny either of those things. He simply notes that his use is currently legal and declines to change it on the basis that legality and ethics are separate considerations, and he has only agreed to operate within the first category. Snyder takes the logo issue to the NFL and asks for help applying pressure. The NFL communicates to Cartman that the logo needs to change. Cartman's response is to get a marker and draw on the logo. He adds to it. The additions are anatomical. The result is a version of the Washington Redskins logo that is legally still derived from the original design and also completely unusable in any official context because of what Cartman has added to it. He submits this as his updated logo without any indication that he considers this an insufficient response to the NFL's request. ISIS endorses the Washington Redskins startup on social media. This changes the situation for Kyle and Stan in a way that the trademark controversy did not. Kyle's original objection was based on the name's offensiveness to Native Americans, which Cartman handled by noting that the NFL's image problem was not the startup's problem. The ISIS endorsement introduces a different category of association that is is not connected to any argument Cartman is making about the business. The startup did not seek the endorsement. It does not share the endorsing organization's values or goals. But the endorsement exists publicly and attaches to the name in a way nobody planned for and cannot easily undo. Kyle and Stan leave to form their own startup. Their departure does not immediately threaten the Washington Redskins operation because the operation does not require their participation to continue generating Kickstarter revenue. Running it involves doing nothing, and doing nothing is equally achievable with 2 people or 5. Their exit is a statement of principle rather than a strategic blow. For a brief period, with Kyle and Stan gone and the original Kickstarter balance still accumulating, the Washington Redskins startup is the cleanest version of what Cartman originally described. A named entity, a logo, a platform, and incoming money. Nobody is doing anything. Nobody needs to. The operation functions exactly as designed, which is to say it functions as an absence of activity wrapped in the visual language of a company. This is the episode's purest satirical image of the startup culture it is targeting. A business at maximum efficiency because maximum efficiency in this model means doing nothing at all while the platform processes the transactions. The NFL team's decision to resolve the situation through direct action is the episode's sharpest satire of how large institutions respond to challenges that operate outside the legal framework those institutions usually rely on. Snyder cannot sue Cartman because the trademark is canceled. He cannot seek an injunction because the legal basis does not currently exist. All the normal channels are unavailable. The NFL team resolves this by going to Kickstarter's physical offices and burning them down. The building is destroyed. The platform is gone. Every Kickstarter campaign accumulating funding at the time of the fire loses its money because the infrastructure holding it no longer exists. The Washington Redskins startup's balance disappears with the building. Snyder has resolved the naming dispute by eliminating the platform that gave it commercial significance, which is effective in the specific sense of producing the desired outcome and catastrophic in every other sense because it also eliminates the platform for thousands of other campaigns that had nothing to do with the Washington Redskins controversy. Kyle and Stan's separate startup loses its funding too. The shared loss is equalizing. Whatever the difference was between the two startups, both of them end up without money and without platform. The common loss creates the conditions for the group to reunite, not because anyone resolved their disagreements, but because maintaining the disagreement now costs more than dropping it. Cartman's pivot is immediate and logical. Kickstarter is gone. The need Kickstarter was filling has not gone anywhere. The crowdfunding model worked well enough that significant numbers of people were using it before the fire, and those people still need a platform. The Washington Redskins startup already has brand awareness from the last several weeks of controversy, and converting it from a do-nothing campaign into a functional crowdfunding platform is a natural extension of existing brand equity. The press conference where he announces the pivot is one of the episode's stronger moments because the announcement is completely reasonable and the reasoning behind it is sound. The Washington Redskins is now a crowdfunding platform. People with startup ideas can use it to raise money. The platform takes a percentage. Cartman is describing a real business model that serves a real market need. The NFL team destroys the new offices. Same method as before. Physical force applied directly to the infrastructure, bypassing every legal and regulatory mechanism that would normally be available to challenge an operation that is not currently doing anything illegal. The second destruction is faster and more decisive than the first because the approach is already established. The startup ends. The pivot ends with it. The boys return to school, not because school became more appealing or any objection to it was addressed, because the alternative they built was destroyed twice by a franchise that found it easier to burn buildings than to wait for the legal process to resolve things in its favor. There are two satirical targets in this episode, and both of them land. The first is the crowdfunding startup culture of 2014, specifically the version where raising money and building a product are treated as separate activities with no necessary connection, where the ability to generate funding is confused with the ability to generate value, and where the people with the best names and the most compelling pitches collect money without any obligation to produce what the pitch described. Cartman builds the purest possible version of this model, a startup that openly does nothing, and the model works until the building burns. The episode aired on September 24th, 2014, 1 week after Ray Rice's domestic violence footage became public and the NFL's initial 2-game suspension was widely criticized as inadequate. The timing is not accidental. Parker and Stone were building the episode during the week the Rice story was at its most intense, and the background elements referencing an unnamed player and a league commissioner struggling to explain a punishment that satisfied nobody were direct responses to what was in the news. The episode does not make that storyline its center, matter, but its presence in the background changes how the NFL's behavior in the foreground reads. A league simultaneously failing to address player conduct and dispatching its team to burn down a child's business is a specific portrait of an institution operating on one set of rules for situations that embarrass it and a completely different set for situations that inconvenience it. Cartman identified a real opportunity, exploited it correctly within the legal constraints that existed at the time, pivoted effectively when the first version was destroyed, and still ended up back in class on Monday because the opposing party had more physical resources and less concern for due process than the situation was designed to assume. The startup is gone. The name controversy that created the opportunity continues. The underlying conditions that produced both of them remain exactly as they were before any of this happened. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Washington Redskins startup was destroyed twice by force rather than by law. The final venture in this history required no NFL team, no corporation, and no outside force at all. Cartman destroyed it entirely by himself, and the only thing he was trying to protect was his mother's attention. Section 10. The South Park Realty Group, the business that was never about money. During the pandemic, people figured out their jobs could be done from anywhere. Once that happened, a lot of them stopped paying expensive city rent for an apartment near an office they were no longer going to. They started looking at smaller towns where the same money went further, the streets were quieter, and nobody was trying to charge them $3,000 a month for a studio apartment with one window. The towns those people moved to were not ready for them. Property prices climbed fast because the new arrivals had city salaries and were willing to pay city prices for places that had never been priced that way before. People who already owned their homes came out ahead. People who were renting watched their costs go up to match a market they had not created and could not compete with. City People aired February 16th, 2022, and it drops that exact situation into South Park. The city arrivals are depicted as clucking like pigeons every time they encounter something that reminds them of where they came from. They want cortados, they want oat milk, they want to know about Pilates studios and fiber internet, and whether the local grocery carries their brand of sparkling water. The existing residents respond the way small towns typically respond to people who show up from somewhere more expensive and immediately start changing things, which is with confusion first and then hostility once the confusion runs out. The rent on the Cartman residence has risen as a direct result of the influx. Leanne Cartman needs income she does not currently have. She decides to become a real estate agent, gets her license, joins South Park Realtors, and comes home to tell her son about her new job. Cartman is furious. His stated reason is that she was not home when he arrived from school. His actual reason takes longer to surface, but is already visible in the intensity of his reaction to news that most children would receive with indifference. His mother having a job means his mother having somewhere to be that is not home. It means she has obligations that compete with her obligation to him. It means her time has been allocated to something external without his input or consent. This is unacceptable in a way that goes beyond inconvenience into something closer to a structural threat. He goes to Butters the next morning and describes real estate as legal theft. This description is not entirely inaccurate. Agents are compensated through a percentage of transaction value that has no necessary connection to the actual work performed to facilitate the transaction. A simple deal in an expensive market produces a large commission. A complicated deal in a modest market produces a small one. The connection between effort and reward in real estate commission structures is loose enough that Cartman approves of it immediately. He asks Butters to take professional photographs of him for his listing profile and tells him not to tell anyone about the new job. The South Park Realty Group is established the same day. Cartman's first move is to list Tolkien Black's former residence. The Black family has recently moved and the property is now vacant. In a market where city people are paying urban prices for rural properties, Cartman lists it at $50 million, which is the number someone picks when they want to see how far the market will stretch before it pushes back. He stages the open house with the specific refreshments that city people associate with quality: water bottles, LaCroix, edamame, cortados, oat milk, acai. He has done the research. He knows what signals luxury to this specific audience and deploys those signals without any of the irony that the selection might seem to require. His mother shows up at the same open house representing the same property to a different group of prospective buyers. The confrontation between them in the middle of an active showing is the collision the episode has been building toward since Leanne walked through the door with her news. Two agents from competing firms attempting to show the same property simultaneously to different clients is a scenario that real estate's relatively informal norms occasionally permit in the early stages of a listing before exclusivity arrangements are formalized. The chaos it produces is professional on the surface and deeply personal underneath, because the people having the the argument are not competing agents. They are a mother and her son, and the argument they are having in front of city people who want to know about the Wi-Fi is not really about the listing at all. Both of them have brought their full energy to the same property at the same time, and neither is willing to step back. Cartman escalates. Leanne holds her ground in a way she does not always hold it. The city people standing between them are watching something they did not expect from an open house, which is a family argument conducted at professional volume, and their response is to keep asking about the espresso situation because they have decided to remain focused on what brought them there, regardless of what is happening around them. The town council's response to the gentrification crisis is the one that South Park civic authorities always produce, which is decisive and excessive and resolved through a mechanism that works immediately and creates significant collateral disorder. Gunshots are fired in the direction of the city people. The city people flee. The acute phase of the crisis ends with the speed of a community that has decided the most direct available solution is the correct one, regardless of its legal standing or its downstream consequences. The town is clear. The immediate problem is solved. Everything else is someone else's problem. Cartman and Leanne take cover together when the shooting starts. This is the moment the episode has been arranging everything else to produce. Two people in close proximity with no audience and nothing left to manage except the conversation they have not yet had. The external chaos forces an internal one. Cartman tells his mother the truth about the South Park Realty Group. He did not start it to make money. He started it to prevent her from keeping her job. His goal was never to build a competing real estate operation or to capture market share or to prove that he could outsell a licensed agent with professional experience available in the market ahead of her. His goal was to make her job impossible enough that she would quit, come home, and return to the single occupation he considered legitimate for her, which was attending to him. He is her job. He told her this the day she announced the position. He meant it literally. The South Park Realty Group was not a business. It was an argument made in the form of a business, and the argument was that his mother's time and attention belonged to him rather than to any external employer. The staging and the listing price and the open house refreshments were never commercial decisions. They were tools aimed at a single target. Leanne's reaction to this is the episode's most significant development in a relationship that has spent 25 seasons operating according to a fixed dynamic. She has absorbed his behavior before. She has apologized for him, enabled him, and provided the unconditional accommodation of someone who decided long ago that maintaining the relationship required accepting whatever came with it. Episodes across the show's run have established this as structural rather than situational. She does not become less accommodating when he does terrible things. She absorbs the terrible things and remains functionally the same. What she receives under the gunfire is different from anything she received before. It is a direct admission that he deliberately sabotaged her professional life because he was unwilling to share her attention with anything else. She has not been told this before. Not this plainly. Previous terrible Cartman decisions have been things she could interpret charitably or ignore entirely, or simply absorb into the general background noise of what living with him requires. This one is stated out loud. She cannot reframe it. She cannot pretend she did not hear it. She knows exactly what he did and exactly why he did it, and he told her himself. She quits real estate. The South Park Realty Group's campaign achieves its stated objective. The strategy worked. His mother is home. The job is gone. Without her income and without any immediate prospect of generating income quickly enough to address the situation, the Cartman residence becomes unaffordable and they lose it. They move into the Coney Island hot dog stand, a small hot dog shaped structure in South Park that had been operating as an actual food vendor and now serves as a residence for a woman and her son who have just experienced the practical consequence of the strategy working exactly as intended. The hot dog stand is not a catastrophe in the way that some collapses produce catastrophes. Nobody goes to jail. No legal judgment is entered against Cartman. The structure is habitable and has utilities, and is located in South Park rather than somewhere distant and unfamiliar. But it is not their house, and the path that led to losing it runs directly through a decision Cartman made the morning after his mother announced her job. He built something designed to destroy her ability to keep that job. The strategy worked exactly as intended, and the cost of its success was the home itself. The damage to the relationship is described by the episode's final scenes as potentially lasting in a way that previous Cartman decisions have not produced. Leanne has spent 25 seasons absorbing what he does without developing the kind of sustained resentment that changes the fundamental terms of their relationship. Her orientation toward him has been one of complete and bottomless accommodation that previous terrible decisions have not altered at the structural level. What City People gives her is specific information about a specific specific decision made against her deliberately, with full awareness of the consequences, and communicated to her directly by the person who made it. She gave up a job she needed because her son constructed a rival business to prevent her from keeping it. She knows this now in a way she did not know it while it was happening. The knowledge sits differently from the general pattern of behavior she had previously absorbed and moved past. How differently, and what it means for the long-term dynamic between them, the episode leaves open rather than resolving. The real estate industry itself is a reasonable target for everything the episode directs at it. The City People storyline is built around the observation that rising property values in desirable locations are not an accident or a natural phenomenon, but the result of specific market conditions that benefit certain participants and harm others. Real estate agents are among the primary beneficiaries of those conditions, regardless of what they did to create them. They collect percentages of transactions that their presence did not cause and their absence would not prevent. The market does most of the work. The agent collects a commission for facilitating the paperwork. Cartman calling real estate legal theft in his conversation with Butters is a joke and also a structural observation about how commission-based property transactions distribute their proceeds. The joke lands because the observation is accurate enough to recognize, even if the language is harsher than most industry participants would choose. The commission structure is not a secret. It is how the business works and has worked for a long time, and the people who benefit from it have developed sophisticated language for describing the value they provide that does not require drawing attention to how the compensation compares to the effort involved in specific transactions. Cartman understood the industry well enough to enter it the same day he decided to enter it. The listing price he chose for the black residence reflected real market conditions rather than pure fantasy. The refreshments he selected for the open house were correctly targeted at the actual psychology of the buyers he was trying to attract. The professional photograph he asked Butters to take was the right first step for establishing a credible agent profile. None of these things required professional training or industry experience. They required paying attention to how the business operated and replicating the surface elements that produced client confidence. This is a skill Cartman has demonstrated across every business he has ever started. He reads the signals quickly, reproduces them accurately, and enters the market before most people finish deciding whether the market is worth entering. What the South Park Realty Group required that Cartman could not supply was any purpose beyond its actual purpose, which was destruction. A business built to eliminate something rather than create anything has no model for what happens after the elimination succeeds. The target disappears and the business disappears with it because the business never had any other reason to exist. The moment Leanne quit, the South Park Realty Group had nothing left to do. It could not pivot to a new product or expand into an adjacent market or seek acquisition by a larger firm. It had done the one thing it was built to do, and the one thing it was built to do was finished. It ended not with a legal problem or a market failure or a single catastrophic decision made in public, but with the completion of its own objective, quietly, in a moment of cover taken from gunfire, when the person who built it admitted out loud what it was actually for. The hot dog stand is where he ends up. Not broke in any dramatic sense, not arrested, not sued, not outmaneuvered by a corporation or exposed by a partner who looked too closely at the product. Just living in a building shaped like a hot dog with his mother, who now knows exactly what he did and why he did it, and who is presumably thinking about what that means going forward. He got what he wanted. She stayed home. The cost of getting what he wanted was the home itself, which is the kind of outcome that makes complete sense once someone explains it, and makes no sense at all while it is happening. Cartman has ended more businesses than most adults will ever start. Through arrogance, through impatience, through one wrong sentence at the worst possible moment, through not reading contracts carefully enough, and through building things designed to fail from the inside out. The hot dog stand is just where the latest one landed, and knowing Cartman, the next one is already halfway planned. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.